Alrighty. Jeff, did you want me to open it up?
You know what? I'll just say hello to everyone, folks. My name is Jeff Leeper. I'm the city councilor for the neighborhood, and I know that many of you who are here on the call this evening are opposed, and we've received your emails to the development application. Others are going to explain exactly what the application is for and take you through what the development would look like, etc. I did just want to say before we kick off tonight. That I know that many of you are not in favor of this proposal. I don't see a lot of planning grounds upon which to oppose it. I just wanted to be clear up at the top that I suspect that this one is heading towards an approval at City Council. What I would love to do is I'm happy to sit down with Catherine and others to talk about how the planning process works and provide more nuance than you might hear this evening. Tonight is your opportunity to ask questions about what the development actually is. So generally what we do is we hold an open house, get the information and the facts you need in order to be able to craft your arguments, and then over the course of the next few weeks you're going to put those arguments to John Bernier, who's here on the call, who is the city planner on the file, who is ultimately going to have to make a recommendation to the planning committee as to whether or not we should approve or refuse this development. Even though I am struggling to see a way in which this one could be opposed, it looks like it is exactly what the provincial policy statement and Ottawa's official plan are looking for. My job is nonetheless to try to help you craft the best arguments that you can. So I would look forward to having a discussion about more nuance with respect to how the planning process works and the basis upon which the planning committee and then city council and also John will be making their decisions about what to recommend. But with that then, I just want to make sure that I was clear with where I see this one going. I would like to turn it back over to Steph, who will take care of all the administrative details. Thanks, Steph.
Thanks, Jeff. So I'll go over our housekeeping items, just not sprint through them as much as we might in the past, just so everyone's aware kind of how we tend to proceed with these meetings. So you'll notice that if you're in this meeting, you probably can't use the chat and you can't turn on your video or speak. So we're in a webinar right now, and the way that we're going to go about taking questions and posing them to developers and to city staff is that we're going to be taking any and all questions in the Q&A as long as they're relevant and obviously not inappropriate. And we'll just be reading those aloud so that everyone can hear in the recording and also in this meeting, whatever questions come up. So just for anyone who's wondering where to ask a question or where to comment on a certain aspect of the plan that you want clarity on the bottom of your screen, the Q&A is going to be your go-to tonight. So generally how we begin with these meetings, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to open up the floor to the applicants to give about a 15-20-minute presentation on the planning rationale for their application. Tonight, actually, we also have city staff, John Bernier, the planner on this file, who's going to give a bit of an overview of sort of what the city planning process is like and how the comments will be taken into consideration and what the process is like. After that, it's really just a Q&A, taking questions right till the end of the meeting or until we don't have any further questions to ask. So tonight, that could go right until 9 o'clock, or it could, end sooner. Just so everyone's aware, once again, if you know anyone who wasn't able to come to this meeting, we're going to be recording it and posting it on the Kitchissippi Ward YouTube account. You Google or look up Kitchissippi Ward YouTube on YouTube. You should find it relatively quickly. But if you have any trouble finding that, we'll give you our emails at the end of the meeting, which I'm sure everyone has, and you'll be able to grab that recording as soon as it's available. So I don't want to take up any more time going over our housekeeping items. Hopefully everything's clear, and I'll reiterate it again once we jump into Q&A for everyone's benefit. But for now, I think I'll hand it over to John Bernier first, and then over to the applicant team, if that's good with everybody. I assume yes. So John, if you'd like the floor, it's totally yours.
All right. Thanks so much, Steph. So yeah, my name is John Bernier. I'm with the Planning, Real Estate, and Economic Development Department. And so as you may be aware, we're currently all involved in a zoning bylaw and official plan amendment application process for 200 and 210 Clearview Avenue. And so I've been asked just to explain kind of what those processes are, and to go through a few of the steps involved, and to answer any of your questions I may have later on.
John, would it be possible to make the slides a bit larger?
Is it letterbox right now?
It's not
Is it that?
letterbox, it's appearing portrait instead of sort of landscape. We got a comment on it, so. just
Okay,
wanted to ask.
let's see. Okay, I'll try to, because I have, yeah, I'll try to switch it over. Hold on here. Is that better?
Much better.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
better.
okay. It's
Thanks.
now sideways for me just because I had it on kind of portrait. But anyways, there we go. Let's close that. Okay, so yeah, step number one. So first, we receive an application from the developer, and generally it's my job to then coordinate the circulation, the review process. I then ensure that the application includes all the necessary plans and studies in order to deem it complete, and for us to conduct a proper review of the application. So prior to circulating, I do give a heads up to the registered community groups and the ward councillor. And this just gives them the opportunity to know in advance of, what's coming, and to prepare themselves, and to ask me any questions before it's formally circulated. Okay, and then so we do post an on-site sign. You may have seen that. There's 2 of them posted on the north and the south frontages. And pretty much everything that we receive to support the application is actually posted on our website. And it's called Development Applications website, or DevApps for short. And because I'm not an expert in all the various disciplines required to review the project, I actually circulate the application out to various technical agencies, such as transportation planning, police, parks, conservation authority, forestry services, our urban design team, and so on and so forth. And that's just basically to get a better idea of what the issues are with the project, and to tackle any issues that may arise, and come to a resolution. And so once the circulation is complete, so we should have a better understanding of what these issues are. And I receive all of these comments from these agencies. And I do want to note that even though there is a deadline, we do, and we encourage that you try to provide your comments by that deadline. We actually continue to accept comments as we move through the process, up until the point of my final recommendation. So don't feel as though that you need to make a decision or formulate your comments by that time. I mean, it would be appreciated by that time, but if you need additional time, that's perfectly fine. So a community information session is a bit of an optional stage at this point. In this case, it was requested by your ward councillor, and it just provides the applicant team with the opportunity to present the proposal, and for myself to present the planning process and to hear your comments, and then also let you know how you can get involved if you don't already know how to do so. So once we receive the comments and understand the issues, we then go about trying to resolve these issues. Often it's a bit of an iterative process. So we'll send the comments to the applicant, and they'll sort of revise their application and resubmit along with you know, their formal responses to our concerns. And then number 9, we begin drafting, or I begin drafting my planning report with all of my recommendations and my rationale. And that will be going to my director of planning for review. And then it goes to planning committee. So I'll say that everyone that has been involved in the process or has been providing comments will be notified 10 days in advance of this planning committee meeting. So the planning committee basically is made up of a select few councillors, and actually you have the benefit of having one of your councillors as being one of the chairs of that planning committee. So, and we can congratulate him for that. Basically that delegation hears, that group of councillors hear the public comments, you know, go through my report, and then provide their recommendation to council. So the file does go to council. So that's all of the councillors around the table, you know, for final decision. And they do take into account the recommendations from planning committee. And then finally, a notice of decision is sent out to all of those that have participated in the process. And essentially it initiates at that point a 20-day appeal period. And only those that have participated in this process have the ability to appeal. But if no appeals are received, then the zoning and official plan are in effect. And I will say that before anything can be built, like right now, we only have a official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment to essentially establish the right to develop. But there will be a need for another application called site plan, and that'll deal with more of the functional and design elements, such as landscaping and whatnot. And then we'll get into more of the engineering of the building as well. And I'd like to throw up this slide here just to give you an idea of what application or what reports and plans were submitted to support this application. And again, all of this information, all of these studies and plans that we receive and are reviewing and have circulated, that's all available on our DevApps page for everyone to view and comment on. And you know, part of my job is actually to explain, if you have any questions on some of this technical material, to explain you know, what the use or purpose of these studies and reports are for. So I will say again, so the DevApps page, I guess the best way of getting to it or getting anywhere on the internet for that matter is to basically Google it. So Google City of Ottawa DevApps, and then that'll bring you to the DevApps page. And then there will be a search bar, just type in 200 Clearview. And then that will bring you to the page with all those studies and plans. And that's it for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. I'll actually put that DevApps link in the chat for everyone for their benefit. And I'll hand it over to Patricia and her team to go over their presentation.
Perfect. I'm just going to share my screen here. Great, and you're able to see the screen?
We can.
Okay, perfect. So thanks, Steph, and thanks for the presentation, John. So my name is Patricia Warren, and I'm a planner with FO10 Planning and Design. And joining me tonight is Paul Black, one of our associates at FO10 as well. I'm also joined tonight by some of the project team, including Rod Leahy and Jolly Shan from RLA Architecture. as well as Andrew Hart from CGH Transportation. We also have Homestead joining us, who are the property owners. So Jack, Mark, and Elf are from Homestead, and they're available to answer any questions you might have. Tonight, I'll be providing an overview of the site and surrounding area, as well as the planning applications and planning policy, while Rod from RLA Architecture will provide you an overview of the design of the building. The planning applications were submitted in late October, and as such, we haven't received the first round of comments yet. So we're looking forward to hearing some comments from the community to get some feedback that we can include and consider in revisions to the plan once we get comments from the city. So I'd like to begin by providing an overview of the site and surrounding area context. The subject property outlined in blue is currently developed with one 26-story residential tower. The proposed development, a 25-story residential tower, is proposed to be located where it's outlined in orange on the image on the existing surface parking lot. The property is currently accessed from all three street frontages, so Clearview Avenue, Lanark Avenue, and Ellendale Crescent, with existing underground parking access provided from Clearview Avenue. The property is located approximately a 300-meter walk from the Westboro Transit Station, with direct access to the station via an existing path south of the property. This has been outlined on the slide in red. And the property is also located within 300 meters of the Sir John A. Macdonald Parkway and the associated NCC pathways. The area surrounding the subject property is characterized by a mix of low-rise and high-rise development, as outlined in the images on the screen. The top left image is looking north towards the subject property, and the top right image is looking south at the subject property. Both images show how the surface parking lot that will be redeveloped and highlights the existing high-rise towers in the area. The bottom images looking east along Clearview Avenue and east along Lanark Avenue demonstrate the interface between existing high-rise buildings and the existing low-rise development to the north and to the south, respectively. A similar interface will be achieved through the proposed development. So next, I'll walk you through the policy framework for the proposed residential development. As some of you may be aware, the City of Ottawa's new official plan recently received ministry approval. However, the development applications for the proposed development were submitted prior to this approval. So tonight I'll be going through both the official plan that was in effect at the time of the application submission, as well as the newly approved official plan. So in terms of the official plan that was in effect at the time of application submission, the subject property is designated general urban area, which applies to the vast majority of the city within the Greenbelt. The policies generally permit a maximum height of 4 stories, but opportunities for greater height can be achieved where sites are located in close proximity to rapid transit or in areas that are already characterized by taller buildings. The policies also seek to ensure that intensification is compatible with the existing scale and pattern of development, while also considering new opportunities to increase the mix of unit types and tenure to ensure the needs of people of all ages, incomes, and life circumstances. And so next, the City of Ottawa, the new official plan, which I had mentioned recently received approval from the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, has located the subject property within the inner urban transect. The subject property has also been designated as neighborhood with the evolving overlay applied. And so the inner urban transect is generally planned for mid to high density development within proximity and access to rapid transit. And the official plan identifies neighborhoods as contiguous urban areas that constitute the heart of communities. And it is the intent of the official plan that neighborhoods, along with hubs and corridors, permit a mix of building forms and densities. And so similar to the general urban area that was shown in the previous slide, permitted building heights in neighborhoods are low rise, except in areas already characterized by taller buildings. The neighborhood policies also direct that higher densities and heights, including predominantly apartment and shared accommodation forms, be permitted in areas closer to, but not limited to, rapid transit stations, corridors, and major neighborhood amenities. And the evolving overlay, that overlay is intended to signal gradual evolution of an area over time, seeing a change in character that will support intensification. So in addition to the official plan, we also have the Richmond Road Westboro secondary plan. As part of the new official plan process, the secondary plan was carried over, and terminology within the plan was updated to ensure consistency with the new official plan. However, the policy direction still remains the same. As the existing Richmond Road Westboro secondary plan is what was in effect at the time of our application submission, and the policy direction and mapping has remained the same. I've just included that in the presentation tonight, but if you are interested in seeing the updated maps from the new official plan, those are included in our planning rationale that's located online on DevApp. And so the subject property is located within planning area sector 6, Westboro Beach, Atlanta, Selby, as shown in the top image on the screen. The secondary plan policies direct that the area is maintained as a low-rise area, and that specifically the Bloomfield Yards and the Jules Leger Center support 4-story residential zoning should the sites be developed in the future. Schedule C2 of the secondary plan provides general maximum building heights for the secondary plan area. And as indicated in the map in the bottom corner on the screen, the subject property has not been assigned a maximum permitted building height. And so as part of the proposed development, an official plan amendment application has been submitted to amend the schedule to permit a maximum building height of 25 stories. And as the current schedule does not provide the maximum height, so it just shows that as white, and to us that just signals that no maximum height has been identified. So next I'll walk through the zoning of the property. The property is currently zoned residential 5th density, subzone C, with a maximum permitted height of 28 meters and a site-specific schedule. And the site is also subject to a parks and open space zoning with an urban exception 313, with a portion of this zone subject to a site-specific schedule as well. So the purpose of the R5 zone is to allow a wide mix of residential building forms ranging from detached dwellings to mid and high-rise apartment dwellings. And the purpose of the parks and open space zone is to permit parks, open space, and related and compatible uses. It should be noted that the existing open space zone on the subject property is a hydro corridor. And so exception 313, that permits accessory uses for a permitted use immediately abutting the zone, while schedule 216 outlines the extent of which an underground parking garage is permitted. Schedule 216 also considers required setbacks for an apartment building. And as part of the proposed development, we have submitted a zoning bylaw amendment application to increase the permitted maximum building height to 80 meters to permit the 25-story residential tower. And as part of that zoning bylaw amendment, we would also be looking to remove Schedule 216 as well as Urban Exception 313 from the R5C and the O1 zones. So next, I'll walk you through a high-level overview of the proposed development, and then I'll hand it over to Rod from our architecture team to walk you through the design. So the proposed development is a 25-story residential tower that will consist of 197 rental units. The unit mix of the building will include 71 one-bedroom units and 126 two-bedroom units. As the development is a planned unit development, so meaning that there's multiple buildings on one site, a total of 397 parking spaces will be provided for the residents of both buildings, accounting for a parking rate of 0.9 parking spaces per unit. A total of 169 bicycle parking spaces are proposed for the building, accounting for a bike parking rate of 0.85 spaces per unit. A total of 1,934 square meters of communal amenity space will be provided within the building, with the ground floor amenity space accessible to residents at the proposed building, as well as residents at 185, 195, and 200 Clearview Avenue. So with that, that was sort of high level, but I guess I'll turn it over to Rod. So maybe I'll stop sharing my screen and then you
Actually,
can,
Patricia, you can just,
Sure.
if you want, just, and I'll just
Sure,
say
if you
next, say
sure,
next
that
slide.
works. Perfect. I'll jump to the next slide there for you.
So I think just in the statistics, when they're talking about numbers of units, parking spaces, it should be noted that the surface parking area, all the cars within the surface parking area will be reintegrated into the underground parking garage. That's why we're sort of, if you look at just this project and the number of cars down below, we're over parking. It's just because we're picking up the parking spaces that were surface parking levels, in case somebody didn't understand that. So I guess this slide really just brings a slide. It's what we do a context plan to show you our proposed building in context to the immediate environment. I think Patricia spoke to really this in the context plan. So you go to the next slide. So this is just our site plan, and it's important to note how with this, how we sort of envision how we'll access this property. Previously on the, well, actually it exists today, there's access to the surface parking lot is coming across the site from Ellendale through and into the surface parking lot area. What we're proposing to do now is basically have our service and the drop-off areas to the two buildings coming off that internal laneway. Basically, we'll be able to do a quick sort of turnaround to the existing building and then drive through underneath the hydro corridor and then to the front of the new proposed building and out onto Lanark Avenue. Access to the underground parking garage for the existing building obviously remains as is, and for the proposed building, they'll come off Clearview to underground parking garage. Service for the new building will come off a laneway off of Lanark, and you can see that area. I don't know, Patricia, if you can show it in between the parking lot and our building. There's a sort of a white area, which is sort of a service on the left side of the where it says 25 story. Yeah, that's sort of a service for garbage and loading. So it's a very simple plan. It's easy access, but a key to this plan we begin developing the site is how we put a high-rise building in a site like this that has evolved into more intensification of low-rise around this site since the original buildings were built. And so you can see we've introduced the idea of the podium. So the tower portion is that area, again, Patricia, you can sort of circle the area of the tower, which says 25-story tower. So that's actually 21 stories on top of a 4-story podium. So it's a 25-story building in total height. So you can see the size of the tower is similar in size to the existing building on the site. And then we have a 3-story podium to the south. And again, we dropped this to 3 stories to begin to relate the Lanark Avenue sort of scale of development on the south side of the street with the townhouses to a sort of 3-story development. On the north side, we have a 4-story podium that steps down to 3 stories. And again, sort of trying to locate the tower to minimize the impact on the existing neighborhood. And you'll see through the elevations, we treat the podium sections a little differently in terms of architecture. So we can go to the next slide. I think these are the more sort of diagrammatic sort of slides of how the building works. You can see the ground floor is made up of amenity spaces, service spaces, and a few units. It's really sort of more of a functional floor. As we move up to the next slide, sorry, we're moving down. This shows the limit of the underground parking. Basically, so we're sort of, if you look at this purely as a new project, you see would be really over parked here. It's just that we're actually picking up parking of that was underground. So, which then brings down the overall rate to a more reasonable rate of 0.9. So go to the next slide. Again, these are just the buildings. So you can see the ground floor is both amenity and functional spaces. Then we move up to the second, third floor plan. is showing units facing both east and west predominantly. And then we go up into the fourth floor, where I've said you've got that extended sort of amenity room up on the fourth floor. And then the tower footprint, the 5th to the 20th is shown, quite small. One thing I should note in this mix, we've got a very low, it's a unusual mix of units. It's 71 one-bedroom units, 126 two-bedroom units. I'm not sure that the people understand. The client Homestead is interested in creating, let's say, more livable units. The units generally are larger, more interested in getting in family type units into the building. So as we develop this, we'll be developing sort of 2 bedrooms with studies, possible 3-bedroom units, certain locations. This is sort of a beginning point. It's really to nail down the perimeter and heights of the building. But you can see we do have a very sort of focus toward more larger units as opposed to smaller units that you see in more sort of downtown or more urban areas. Next slide. It's just showing that the building as it evolves through the top, we begin carving away at the building and reducing the tower footprint as you move up. I think next slide gets into elevations. And you can see, so this is a building, sort of a long section looking through the site at the east elevation. And so this is this idea of the podium. You can see the 3-story podium on the south side of the building, and then the 4-story building. It's really 3 plus a 1-story amenity area up on the roof of the 4th floor. And then you have the tower portion. And then we always talk about the towers with the sort of the base, the middle, and then the crown at the top. So that's that carving that takes place, change of materials, again, all to sort of animate the building. So next slide. This is the opposite side. Again, this transition from this case from north to south. Next slide. And again, it's very narrow building. You can see from the both the north and south elevations. Again, the idea of sort of addressing a very lower scale at the from the 3rd floor down gives opportunity for landscaping on that rooftop terrace. We have good side yards for landscaping. So next slide. Again, these are some quick slides these are done in-house, and so they're not the sort of fancy renderings you would see. The next iteration of this plan will probably get into a little bit more realistic, photorealistic renderings, but it gives a sense of scale. So you can see the sort of 3 towers exist right now in the proposed building and a scale. Next slide. Yeah, again, just various views. Next slide. Again, I think this slide helps this relationship between the podium and the existing townhouses that exist on the south side of Lanark Avenue. And that's why when we did the podium, we were careful to keep it at a 3-story height. And we do have podiums for these buildings can go anywhere from really 1-story, 2-story, right up to 9-story podiums. There's nothing really that dictates how high a podium to tower is or the relationship. It's really more contextual. And in our opinion, the 3-story line worked really nicely with the streetscape in terms of respecting the buildings across the street. Next slide. Just some other views, sort of close-up views. The idea, this is just showing how, that running down the long side, how you can develop the architecture of that to be quite interesting. Next slide. And some aerial views in context. And again, we try to show it from all 4 sides here, showing obviously the clustering of high-rise buildings as you look to the south with, the Minto building, the tower, and then buildings on McCrae Street, and then the reverse view, and then go to the next slide. Again, just putting everything in context, showing the townhouses and the relationship to the townhouses. So Next slide. This is an overall building section showing the, people are always interested in the 45-degree angular plane. So you can see how from the Clearview side, the building fits within the angular plane. On the Lanark side, we are moving into the plane, but we feel the way we've designed the building, that helps mitigate any adverse impact. Generally, the biggest impact would be shadowing, of which there are none from on the Lanark side. Next slide. Again, these are sunshade studies that really have to, you can go on DevApps and see these. So we do the 3 major dates in the year. September and March are the same. And we go right from 8 a.m. right through to 8 p.m. The reason why they get shorter, obviously, is the sun as we move through the year. By December, the sun is down at 4 o'clock. So, and it's hardly even going up at 8 p.m. But so this is done, and it's important to look at this. If you're concerned about an existing property, you can highlight it, or we can highlight it for you and bring it up. So, but they really have to be looked at sort of individually, just from a scale point of view. Next slide. And just sustainability, just our approach with high density, basically being able to sort of move the development to be in line with the city's official plan about taking advantage of transit. And then we'll get into, you know, again, reduced heat island effect. We look at all sorts of different types of mechanical systems to maximize or minimize the amount of energy being used. Same with our wall construction. So, and again, both materials, environmentally friendly materials are looked at and source. So I think that's our presentation. I'm sorry it took a little longer than probably expected. So
Yeah, that's the presentation. So I can stop sharing if you want, and then if we need any clarification on any slides, I can pull them back up.
okay, you may want to bring up the site plan if people have, maybe that's a handy one to have out there, just so people can talk to it if they have specific questions. I think it's slide number 10.
Okay.
Awesome. And Patricia, while you do that, I'll open up the Q&A and kind of just reiterate what we went over before. I think we grabbed a good number of new attendees since I last spoke. So for the Q&A, as I think many people have already done and put their questions in the Q&A, anyone who is new and navigating everything, if you have any question on presentation and on this proposal, we're asking that you use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen to ask a question. Otherwise, the chat is closed and there's no other means to do it. So with that, we've got a good number of questions already in the chat. So we're going to try and group them up as much as we can by theme. But well, I assure you, we have 25 questions in there right now. We probably see yours, and we'll do our very best to get to it. So I'll ask maybe one of the first questions we got, and John and perhaps Patricia's team can speak to this. Someone asks, how will you avoid damaging the foundations of the surrounding residences when you blast? I think John might want to go over the blast survey, if not you guys. So I'll put it to you.
Yep, I'm happy to answer that. So yeah, a part of the, well, it would likely be part of the site plan application and resulting agreement. But essentially what we asked for is whenever there is a use of explosives, that they provide a pre-blast survey. And that's essentially prepared for our all buildings, utilities, structures, water wells, and facilities that are likely to be impacted by said activity or the blasting. And that would be 150 meters around wherever the blasting is to occur. So if your foundation so happens to be within that area, then that would be included in that survey.
Awesome. Thanks, John. And if there's any clarity, to whoever asked it, feel free to follow up. There's usually pretty strict conditions that I'm sure John can speak to as well that sort of govern the pre-blast surveys that happen. Jumping to the next question, there's sort of a few on this note, but I'll take a Carrie Roska's question on parking, which says, I'm assuming that the request for 278 parking spaces is not for new parking spaces, since the building will take up current parking spaces. What is the incremental parking spaces being added? Patricia and your team, maybe if you want to speak to what the split between the existing and the new parking spaces are, it might be useful.
Yeah, sure. So the existing high-rise building, it's serviced by 201 parking spaces, and 110 of those spaces are provided underground, and the surface parking accounts for 91 spaces. So as Rod had mentioned earlier, those spaces are being reallocated to underground, and then the additional parking spaces would be for our project. So I guess it would just be the 278 parking spaces minus the 91 would be what the total, if
That's
that's correct. Yeah.
So just to add to that, in the end, there'll be 388 underground parking spots to serve both buildings of the project. So the existing 200 and the new 210, which is the resulting 0.9 space per unit parking rate that's proposed. So it's a combined rate. Homestead owns both buildings, and the parking is shared between them.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul and Patricia. There was sort of a couple questions that were on that. So if you see that yours popping away, that I didn't ask it, just because there was those few touching on underground parking and the total parking requirements. But if there's any clarity, please do let us know. I'll jump up to another question we're seeing. This is coming from the Oaks Association. So they note the geotechnical report assumes that the surrounding buildings are built on bedrock. This is not correct for our townhomes, which are built on concrete slabs. This report is clearly flawed and not adequate for a development of the size. How can blasting and other excavation techniques for this building be conducted so as not to damage our homes? I don't know, Patricia, if your team would maybe like to speak to that report a bit more.
I think they're
go ahead.
referencing the buildings built to rock, where the high-rise buildings, the adjacent high-rise buildings, not necessarily the townhouse buildings. So because the high-rise buildings would have had their basements founded on, a building of that size would be founded on rock, as opposed to from what the questioner is saying is those townhouses are on a raft slab, essentially. So
Yeah, I think they're the Oakview private to the, so those are the townhouses north of Clearview. Yeah, so I would say, I mean, that's why we submit the study for review. So that's a valuable comment that we would take back to the geotechnical engineer, and they would review that. And then, as has been mentioned, I mean, currently we're in a zoning bylaw amendment. So the construction techniques really are more of a site plan control issue when we know exactly that we are proceeding to build the building. So right now we're demonstrating that, or the intent of the studies, I should say, is to demonstrate the constructability of the project generally. So the soils can support a 25-story building and how we would go about doing that in greater detail will come through a future site plan control application where more detail would be provided in a geotechnical report, and the construction techniques would be fleshed out in a bit more detail. But certainly that comment is helpful, and we'll take that back to Patterson, who did the geotech report, and have them look at that in the next submission.
Awesome, thank you, Paul, and to Jerry as well. And I know that there's a couple comments from the Oaks Association, and you noted that you would be sending comments, but just to sort of say it, that kind of comment would be very useful to send back to Don Bernier, the planner on the file, to be taken into consideration for the applicants. So just to emphasize how sort of useful having those comments, not just here, but straight to John would be as well. And I'll jump around just to another short question while I package a couple together. Someone asks, will there be EV charging stations provided in the parking or at the building?
Yes. Yes.
Do you have an idea on the numbers? Maybe just to ask as
Well,
well.
you know, I think it really depends on the timing of this project. I know it's just that world is changing rapidly, and demand is changing rapidly. So we will be, you know, putting in the ability to keep adding to it. The exact sort of percentage, we're probably a ways off from understanding that, but what we're doing is trying to future-proof the buildings. You know, we have a government that is or combustible cars in 2035, I think. So, you know, that's not that far away. So we will be adding to it and allowing for, we definitely will be having it. And just, I don't want to give you a percentage because I'll probably be low if I do get that. So, but we will have it, and probably quite a bit more as we move forward with the design development. So.
Thanks, Rod. Maybe just to jump to another question that was recently received. Someone asks, I'm not clear what type of housing this will be, condo, rental, and is there any affordable housing? There's been a few questions as well from others on whether there's an affordable housing component.
Well, I can speak to, it definitely will not be a condominium. This is rental. Homestead is a built essentially a rental portfolio. The affordable housing, Paul, I don't know if we've moved into that discussion yet, but so.
No, not to my knowledge.
No. I just don't have an answer, but again, through the design development, through working with the city of Ottawa, I mean, there's a long process ahead of us still. Sure, Councillor Leeper will want to get involved with that very question. So we don't have an answer for you today. So definitely is a rental building though. And say larger units, family oriented units, potentially. So it's and very livable units too.
I will say from an inclusionary zoning standpoint, which I know is a popular phrase around City Hall, this around Westboro Station is not actually a designated protected major transit station area. And so the Planning Act doesn't actually allow inclusionary zoning to apply to these lands. So it wouldn't be through that mechanism, but it could be through a community benefits charge or some other mechanism that affordable housing is secured.
Thanks, Paul and Rod. Just, this might be a question perhaps better geared to Homestead, but I'll leave it to anyone on the applicant team. But there's a few questions on what the plans for the existing surface spots are during construction and where those people will park. I think perhaps that's a very down the road question, but nonetheless, if anyone
good
can speak to
question.
it. No, it
It's
is.
a good question. We haven't really got into it, but I'm working on another project very similar. We probably would be looking at putting some temporary surface parking lots on the existing buildings, yards, front yards, side yards, and that would be then replaced and replanted in the future. Like we would have to do something like that, sort of create temporary parking spaces on the balance of the property, but I don't know if Homestead has another master plan. But we've done this in the past, or we're doing this right now on a project.
Thanks, Rod. I realize that's a very early question to ask, but understandably, I think
Yeah.
there's
But
residents
I
nearby.
like
who
there
are-
obviously there's a real need for the people that are in that building to maintain their parking spaces. So it's fairly easy to do to actually park over top and then replace the landscaping. So as I say, it's a temporary surface parking. It will be replanted again. So
Thank you so much, Rod. Sorry, I'm going to jump around a bit with questions. Actually, and maybe this is a question, Jeff, if you'd like to pop in an answer to. There's quite a number of questions on what timelines would look like here. So whether it be the process for zoning and site plan, but also construction beginning. I think it's purely speculative at this point, but maybe if anyone wants to try and give their best guess, given the processes we've got at play.
Yeah, if I may say, it is all over the map, right? We have projects like 1040 Somerset that got their shovels in the ground 3 weeks ago, that were approved 12 years ago, roughly. And then there's projects that received site plan approval last year that are going to see occupancy next year, because that particular builder was able to get their financing together and was very keen to get their shovels in the ground. I do wonder, I'm guessing that this would be in front of committee and council likely in May. I don't know if John, that's a good guess as to when a report might move forward.
I mean, that might be a good guesstimate. I mean, well, the file is currently being circulated now, so we're still reviewing the submission material to see. And then, once we understand the issues, then I could probably make a better assessment of which planning committee would go to.
Yeah, so my best guess, just based on my experience, is that we'd probably see this in front of a planning committee, late spring, early summer, something like that. And then is there a concurrent site plan on this one?
no.
Okay, so and are you looking at submitting a site plan after zoning or sometime during the rezoning application?
I mean, we're having discussions right now. Homestead is fairly active right now in a number of fronts. So this is, I believe, unless Mark wants to step in, but I believe this is sort of looking down the road a bit. So, with site plans, the issue is always you don't want to get those too far in advance because you end up having to do them again if they lapse. So I think we'll be talking about that. As we move forward in the new year, whether or not they want to move that forward or just sit with the zoning for now. So,
okay.
But this is on the horizon, but it's not, I know it's not like a next year.
Yeah. So shovels, I ask all that just to, I guess, make clear that it would be really difficult for the local politician to know when they're going to move forward. There's a lot of different variables, but I would suggest that you're probably not putting shovels in the ground for another 3 years or so.
That's probably a pretty good guess. And again, if Mark, if you want to turn on your mic, if you want to.
No, I think that is fairly accurate. I mean, we have another project that we're working on right now. We don't have capacity to do 2 projects at once. So your timelines are pretty accurate, probably 2025.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. But thank you. Thanks, Steph.
No problem. Thanks, everyone. Um, there's a couple sort of comments, questions that I'll sort of round up into one question, which is to the effect of, is there any consideration for adding 3-bedroom units? Sort of comments to the effect of having these more family-sized units in
Yeah.
the building. I'll put it to you, Rod, and your team.
Yeah, you know, we are looking at that as we get and develop. As I mentioned, they traditionally build very large 2-bedroom units. Usually they're 2 bedrooms and studies, but with a little bit of reworking internal, we could easily convert some of those into 3-bedroom units. So we're really just beginning to look at that sort of programming now. I'm seeing it more and more in our sort of rental buildings that we're doing, especially the ones that are a little, you know, not in the downtown core. There seems to be more and more demand for family units. It's just a question of controlling the size, and instead, as a rule, has big units. So I think if demand is there, and again, this project being, you know, 4 or 5 years down the road, you know, we're sort of guessing right now a lot. But I would think by the time we get there, I think we're going to be looking more and more at sort of a 3-bedroom, say, family units or flex units. Units that can be designed to be 2 bedrooms plus a really nice study, but the study could be easily converted to a. So, you know, all our 1-bedrooms all have studies in them, for example, that allow for home office. So it gives that sort of flexibility. So.
All right. Thanks, Rod. Going to another question from Jerry. Why is the proposed setback from Clearview Avenue of 3.7 meters, barely 1/3 of that from Lanark? The Oaks townhomes face directly onto the new building, so there should be an equal setback of 10.9 meters. Even the west side has a setback of 7.5 meters, and it only faces the parking lot.
I'm gonna have to read that. I think they're just looking for
Just
equal.
clarification on that proposed setback for Clearview, which is only 3.7, and
Yeah.
it's significantly less of a setback than what you're seeing on the other side.
I can take that one. So the setback there is 3.7 to, just to be clear, to the 3-story and 4-story podium along Clearview. So the building is significantly lower for around 35 meters until you get to the tower on the north side. So while that setback is less, it does still provide a good setback from the property line, and it's a low-rise form essentially adjacent to those townhouses further north. The tower is set back, like I said, around 35 meters, and so we're achieving that angular plane transition from the Oakview private houses up to the tower. The setback on the south side, it is larger, obviously provides space for landscaping. The CDP speaks a little bit to a green street along Lanark as a goal, I guess, of the CDP, with street trees and pedestrian pathways and things connecting to the through the community to the river in the west. So
I think also, I was going to say also, Paul, is the placement of the tower. That you can see it's been, you know, we were careful in the placement of the tower sort of to move it sort of in line with the existing. So the tower portion, although the podium is closer to the street on Clearview, the tower is set way back from the street. So it's that sort of balancing, I guess, of approaches to the 2 different streets.
Okay, thank you very much, Rod and Paul. just because there's a couple questions to this effect. So a few people are asking whether you've spoken, informed, or consulted with the Centre Jules Léger, which is the special needs Francophone school that's directly adjacent. I'm not sure who would like to speak to it, but just to put the question out there since there's a few on that.
Yeah, as part of the circulation, that they would be circulated, especially the Centre Jules Léger, they would be circulated as part of the process through the city, and they would be able to provide comments if they have any, and then we would receive those during the first round of circulation, and we could speak with them more if we need to.
Yeah, I don't think at this time the team has reached out to them. It's fair to say, I think. Yeah.
All right. Well, if there's any follow-up to that, I'll certainly do my best to look for it. We've got still actually quite a number of questions in the chat, so we'll keep going through them as best we can right now. I'll jump around to another one that we're seeing. Everyone can give me a moment. Just another question on the parking, specifically the parking entrance. Someone asks, if the parking is shared for the two buildings, why can't the existing parking entrance from Clearview be used instead of creating a new one to the west? I'll put that to Patricia, your team, and Rob as well, if you'd like to take it.
See, I don't. There may be an answer to that. I don't have it. I'm wondering if Jolly. I don't know if she's able to speak as a panelist. I'm wondering if that came up. I'm going to just take a look at the parking. You know, it's probably a question of different heights, matching heights. It's, you know, it's a good question. It really is a very good question. Generally, in a phased development, the city would like to see the one entrance and connecting underground. So I may have to get back through the councillor's office if there is a legitimate reason why. There may be. You know, it could be ownership thing. I don't know if they're going to be owned by separate. I know they're both owned by Homestead, but if there's going to be separate numbered companies between the two. So if you could let me answer that through my client and then get back to the councillor's office for an answer. But it's a good question. I have a feeling it's probably been discussed, but I don't have the answer.
All right.
Again, I don't know if Mark, if Mark, if you've even talked about that. I hate to put you on the spot again. You know, whether the idea of joining the underground parking garages, I know they're at sort of different levels too. So I don't know if it's actually easy to do. So, but again, I would like to analyze this and then get back to you. And if it's easy to do it in one, we could keep doing it in one, but there may be a real reason why we're not. So.
And yeah, I don't have anything further on that one, Rod, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's something about that hydro line that runs through, whether or not we're even permitted to do that. So whether or not that easement is subsurface as well as aerial. So that's what I don't want to give an answer if I'm not right. So, but we will get back on that. I think it's a good question. So.
Thank you so much, Rod. And sorry, I didn't realize, but apparently I've been speaking a bit softly, so I'm going to try and make the effort to come through a bit louder for everybody right now. So there's quite a number of questions about construction parking, where will construction workers park, whether this has been taken into consideration, considering your site. I put it out there as a comment since there's been a number of them,
Sure.
but it might also be good to note, and Jeff, if you'd like to speak to this on, how much the construction parking is considered at this stage versus site plan versus a pre-construction meeting and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you know this better than I do, Steph. We normally do host post pre-construction meetings. So at this stage, the question that's in front of council is, is a building of this size and this use and configuration appropriate? When they go to build, there will be a pre-construction meeting that my office will host, in which we sort of dig down much further into the construction plans that they have. So those sort of questions are important, but they won't weigh on the minds of councillors who are voting for this, and they won't weigh on John's mind as he's making a recommendation to council with respect to approval or not. The contractor parking is always a lengthy discussion, and I anticipate that it will be the same with this one as well. Although I do note, Homestead's got a lot of space to try to manage some of those impacts on its own property, which is a bit unique compared to some of the buildings that are being built in our neighborhood.
I could also add to that if you'd like. So yeah, that would be something that we would look at through the site plan application, and it would be through what's called a construction traffic management plan. I should say that comes after site plan approval and through the associated agreement. And through that plan, we have a unit that looks at or reviews the proposed stages of construction and the anticipated duration of each of those stages, as well as identify any truck hauling routes to and from the proposed development site and any proposed accesses. They also look at identifying the locations of any site trailers and whatnot, and then finally looking at equipment and material storage locations that are going to be proposed on site. So we do have a team that specifically looks into that, as well as any of the impacts that this construction would have on things like the travel lanes, pedestrian facilities, cycling facilities, and the transit network.
Thanks, John. Speaking from my experience too, those TMPs really come up at that pre-construction part of the process, and that's really even mere months, mere weeks before is when we see those plans, even just as our office for the first time. So if we could show it now, I'm sure it'd be great, but usually that tends to be when we see them for the first time, and when John even is seeing it and considering it. So I'm going to jump to another kind of bundle of questions, and John, I think I'll try and put this to you, but there's a number of questions about the tower kind of impacting or causing a loss of a view for the neighboring IPT, Island Park Tower, and that sort of concern. How is that, is that, and how is that taken into consideration with a zoning sort of application like this?
Right. So unfortunately, there isn't any sort of hard requirement for protecting one's view. It's more along the lines of planning for the various impacts that a building would have on things like one's privacy, or the shadowing impacts that it would pose on a property. I mean, there are some sort of what's called view sheds that are protected throughout the city. One of the big ones is that a lot of people know about is the views to the Parliament buildings that would kind of regulate or restrict the heights of buildings within that sort of area. But unfortunately, there's nothing in this area that to protect the view to the river. There is, however, a requirement or a building separation requirement between two high-rise towers for those that live in the existing tower, which is for this area is 20 meters. And according to this plan here, it's a 40-meter separation. And again, that's just mainly to sort of mitigate some of the privacy issues that you'd have between the two buildings.
Thanks, John. Jumping to another question. And maybe John, while I have you, I'll ask another that I just spotted that was a question for you. And it asks, how much validation does the city do of the studies conducted by the property owner? So in this case, traffic impacts, drainage runoff, and wind studies seem unrealistic in this case. For example, there's one storm drain on Clearview between Ellendale and the cul-de-sac. It is routinely plugged with organic matter. In the winter, Ellendale-Clearview intersection is a sheet of ice. So I'll put that to you, and if anyone else wants to take it as well.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, these applications come in, they're not motivated by the city. You know, the onus is on the applicant and the owner to demonstrate that the proposal is supportable. And they do that by supporting their application with studies that were generated by professionals. And, you know, we get it a lot that a lot of members of the community are somewhat suspicious of this because obviously the owner is looking for approvals. And so when they hire their own team, you know, they're hopefully getting, they're hearing the right things. But I will say that we have a number of dedicated teams to reviewing all of this subject matter. I mentioned it sort of in my presentation at the start there of some of the individuals and the teams and the people that specialize in these various disciplines that are dedicated to reviewing that material. And like I said before, it's a bit iterative. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of comments from these teams to the applicant team asking for clarification or you know, there are maybe aspects that they didn't consider, such as a known issue with you know, drains being clogged. But I do, you know, sometimes it is like, you know, we aren't aware of all of the issues. So if there is a known issue such as that, I would encourage you to send that to me so that I could convey that to the relevant team. But and then finally, I will say that the professionals that the applicant does retain to provide this material, they're certified professionals in their own field, and often that material is stamped and they certify it.
Yeah, I'll just jump in a second to second what John is saying here. I'll use the traffic study for an example. It is a heavily structured and rigid guideline that we have to follow to meet the city. If you look at any traffic study throughout the city, they're predominantly going to be very similar for every site across, and it entails we have to do 3 check-ins with staff and submit preliminary reports at various stages through our study before we can even have a study for the submission that you've seen now on the as part of this application. And if we haven't done those steps, the applicant's not even allowed to submit the study to the city. So it is very structured. We have constant feedback back and forth. So it's not something like I just go away and draft up a report and throw it out. It's collaborative back and forth and to that guideline.
Thank you, John and Andrew as well. Going to another question. Actually, I'll take 2 that can sort of go together. So first, there was a question on how many visitor parking spots are planned for. So a quick one, I know we talked about the parking before, but Patricia and Paul, maybe if you can speak to how much visitor parking will be provided.
Yeah, so the required visitor parking is 19 spaces for the 197 units. And I believe that the visitor parking has been bundled into the total parking that's being provided. So 19 spaces are visitor parking.
Thanks, Patricia. And sort of a question and a comment that was raised as well. The current parking lot is currently a shortcut for pedestrians. How and will this be considered into the plan? Patricia and Paul, I don't know how much you can speak to it, but even just as a comment to put out there, I want to mention it.
I think if you look at the site plan, you can see how we've integrated public walkways across the green space to allow for pedestrian movement from Clearview through to Lanark. I mean, this is just a concept plan. This will be further developed, but that's our goal, is to maintain that connectivity. Yep.
Thanks so much, Rod and Patricia, and thank you for putting the site plan up as well. And there was sort of a similar question on the parking. I copied it. I'll go and find it once more. So someone asks, considering that the site is only a 2-minute walk from Westboro Station and the city and province asking for greater uses of transit, isn't a 1-to-1 ratio for parking far too much? And maybe implicitly, would you consider a lesser parking ratio?
We're actually at for 0.1 of at 0.9 is made up of visitor parking. So we're really parking the unit at about a point. So we're well under the sort of what's permitted in a zone like this. And you know, this is probably the hardest question of all projects we're working on. What's the appropriate amount of parking? You know, the trick is you don't want to overpark, you also don't want to underpark. So what we're seeing on sites like this, and Homestead has got great records on their projects. They look at what people are doing. Some of the projects we've looked at thinking 1-to-1 parking, but you know, once you analyze it, they're, you know, 20% are sitting vacant. So I think Homestead feels that 0.9 is that number that they feel comfortable with. And what they think is that people will want to maintain their car, but as the transit system keeps improving, your day-to-day usage will be reduced significantly because of the easy access. So, but again, it's a little bit of future proofing. Thinking, you know, dependency on the car and making sure that people can have a car. So, you know, that one of the issues with a lot of our projects where we reverse this ratio of 1 bedroom to 2 bedroom, we reduce the number of parking because there's a feeling that in 1 bedroom units, a lot of those 1 bedroom units, people won't have a car. But when you get into 2 bedroom units, you definitely we see a much higher uptake on people wanting cars with 2 bedroom units than with the 1 bedroom units. And because we're almost working on a sort of 2-to-1 split, you know, the 0.9 I think is an appropriate level on this site.
Just to expand a little bit too, bike parking spaces are also proposed. And so bike parking for a residential building, the requirement in this area is 0.5 spaces per unit. And we've proposed a rate of 0.85 bicycle parking spaces per unit. And also, as noted on the site plan, we do have a pathway. I'll just right here, this sort of mid-block connection here, it connects down to the pathway that connects directly to the Westboro Transit Station. So there's definitely opportunities in the building too to promote the proximity to transit and encourage ridership. With the parking, it doesn't necessarily mean that people won't be able to use transit. We just want people to maybe maybe people will use transit as their first priority and park their vehicles and as a second, but people may still have vehicles.
Thanks, Patricia. Going to a question on the shadow study that you have. Someone asks, can you elaborate on the shadow impact of the 80-meter tower on neighboring homes compared to the previously proposed 10-story building that is currently zoned on the property? I'll put that to you, Patricia, Paul, and Rod. Maybe if you're able to put the shadow study on the screen, that would also help.
Yeah, I can. Do you have that, Patricia? Do you want to put that on? It's here in the end. So what we have is a shadow study of what we're proposing. We're not showing you a shadow study of what could be done in the current zoning. We could create that and add that as additional information. If you can extrapolate from this fairly simple, you can look, this is a 25-story building, you can sort of say a little bit less than half of the shadow length, but the problem is you would get into what the mass of that building is. So if it's a bigger footprint, shadow, just not as tall. So I couldn't describe it verbally. I would have to create a model that showed what you could do under the current zoning bylaw, and then you could then look one against the other. So. You know, the advantage of the way we're doing it is the largest mass of the building is really restricted to that sort of 3-story height. And the taller portion is a much smaller footprint. So the shadow is longer, but it's not as wide, and it moves relatively quickly if you follow the path of the shadow on the diagrams. I really think you have to take a look at these. If you live in the nearby area, you know, you can probably figure out which house is yours, and you can zoom in on that through the application and look at it. And you could really sort of see exactly when the shadow would come across your house.
Thanks, Rod. Going to one more question. And I think there was kind of 2 questions on the matter of where the tower is / where the tower could be better placed. So I'll try and touch on those 2 points. So Anonymous asks, the 2 towers are facing each other such that each tower blocks the view of the other. If the 210 tower were moved further north, so the towers were offset, the views from the towers would be improved. Is it possible to do this? And maybe the question is also, has this been considered in this application?
Yes, it's possible to do this. And I'd have to go back and look at the actual floor plans of the adjacent building and whether those buildings that we're looking at on that side are primary windows or secondary windows. But yeah, the building tower could be moved to the north. I mean, it's again a good suggestion. We would look at the impact of the 2, but it's very easy to do that. It's just sliding everything in the parking garage would more or less remain the same, just the whole core moves forward. So we could take a quick look at that and see if there's an improvement. You are right, it's always good to stagger towers if they're beside each other. This one is fairly different because we have 40 meters in between. So 40 meters it's almost as wide as 2 city streets right beside each other. So that's quite a distance between the towers. So I think we were sort of looking at again the whole idea of the angular plane and trying to pull it off Clearview. You know, the shadows are moving Really, the shadows are moving to the north. Imagine the sun coming along and it's sort of moving more. So by bringing the tower closer to Lanark Avenue, I think we reduce the shadow impact on the buildings on the north side of Clearview Avenue. So a lot of things go into the placement of the tower, and 40-meter separation, the fact that they're facing each other, maybe less of an impact than moving the building to the north and increasing the impact of the shadow. But I'm happy that I think it's something we can look at one more time. So
keep in mind
Thanks,
the
Rod.
comment, sorry, Steph, the comment likely comes from a resident of 200, but a resident on the north side of Clearview may feel differently about the placement of the tower. So
yeah,
obviously we're getting different views tonight, and we can take it away and study it, but
exactly. Yeah.
your neighbors may not feel the same way that you do about it, that's all.
Yep.
Thanks, Rod and Paul as well. Jumping to the next question. So they note it's more of a procedural question, but how different could this proposed building vary compared to what gets submitted versus what we see when we get to the site planning phase? John, maybe if you don't mind me pulling you in, you could help us speak to that.
Right. So whenever we consider additional heights, we ask the applicant to provide studies and plans that demonstrate that it's not going to have an impact, or at least the impacts will be minimal. And so then what we do is, at least in the industry, what we call is shrink wrap the zoning. So we would essentially be restricting the location of the tower to where it is today, or where they're proposing it, or where their studies say that it would have the least amount of impact. So that when we get to the site plan application stage, they would be restricted to those setbacks contained within the zoning schedule that kind of shows where the building should be, and could even go so far as to say, like, the setbacks of even the podium and the height restrictions on the podium. So you won't, at the end of the day, have two towers once we get to the site plan stage.
Thanks for that, John. And I apologize to everybody. I'm trying to pick and choose questions that are kind of covering the breadth of everything being asked today. So this is, I don't know if anyone can speak to this, but it's a interesting question. We assume this building and the many other high rises planned for the area must have outlets for recharging cars, electric cars, my bad. This will create a huge demand on the power grid. How can we find out if the grid has the capacity for this dramatic increase in demand? / is this taken into consideration with these applications?
Yeah, it is taken into consideration, and it's a really good question that, yeah, we're Paul and I are working on a project right now where, if the client said to us, I want to have all 600 cars having power stations, we wouldn't have that. We couldn't service it. It would be as simple as that. There's not enough space in the grid to do that. So it's a question that society will have to address. So we'll have limited amount of resources from the existing hydro that's there that will allow us to do some amount of charging stations. As more and more gets online doing that, then the available limit. So it is a real question as part of the when we do our load analysis, or when the electrical engineer does a load analysis, He basically, we size that, Hydro gives us permission, and it's all based on, let's say 20%, we'll pick a number, 20% of the cars having charging stations. So we'll size our Hydro Vault to do that. They'll then ask permission from the Hydro, do we have enough power to do that? And Hydro is keeping an eye on future buildings in the area coming on. You know, we know the CBC lands are going to be developed, and so all these things sort of get factored into it on whether or not or how much you can get from Hydro. So, but yes, it is something that is calculated and thought about. And I don't think we'll ever be in a point to say all parking spaces within buildings will be allowed to have electric charging stations. So,
John, is Hydro Ottawa one of the agencies that circulated even at this sort of very zoning stage?
I can confirm that. I know its site plan certainly is.
That's
they're
what, yeah.
included. Just give me 1 sec. I'll pull up my note.
I'm just curious because, of course, they don't have to tell us anything about what kind of hydro or charging stations they want until they get to that site plan phase when Hydro Ottawa will be part of the discussion. But I am just curious if Hydro gets circulated on this, which is the rezoning application.
Yes, so I did circulate to Hydro Ottawa, so I do expect comments from them.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Rob, as well. I have a few more questions chosen for us to consider. So someone asks, I had a noise question that might have gotten lost. The noise impact study deals with external noises affecting residents of the new building. Will there be a study of the noise impact from the building on neighboring homes?
Short answer is no. The assessment of noise is based on roadway traffic typically. So, or noise from a stationary noise source. So if there's an industrial site nearby that has a fan that runs consistently or something, then that would be a stationary noise assessment where that would be assessed. Similarly, if a proposal included a stationary noise generator, then that would be an assessment that would be done as part of a development application. But for a new residential building adjacent to another residential building, there's no assessment of the noise coming from the residents of the new building on the residents of the adjacent building.
Thanks so much, Paul. Grab our next question. Sorry, I had marked one to answer and it seemed to have gotten lost. So if everyone can give me just a second. So going to one of what now seems to be one of the first questions that was asked tonight, and this is a sort of a comment for construction as well, but someone notes, how will vehicles turn onto the site given the narrow street? Briarway private, it's a private street and owners would not be allowed the vehicles onto our street. But maybe just talking about the concerns about traffic and vehicles around the site, if anyone can speak to that.
I think it goes back to construction. I think the question's about construction. Briarway Private is south of Lanark and is a dead end street. So I don't think vehicles from the development will be making a habit of going down that street. Lanark is a typical city street that would provide sufficient width for buses and other large vehicles to move through it and access the site. So all the site accesses would be designed to accommodate whatever size vehicle is anticipated by the development. That again is part of site plan control, where we would do templates to show how a truck gets to the site and moves on the site.
Yeah, I think it was a bit more of a construction question too, but I can certainly see the concern with the sort of.
Yeah, so
The
the construction aspect would come back to that construction management plan, like we were talking about, where those details are hammered out before construction begins.
Yeah, I could add on to that, Paul. When we get to that point, and it's a few steps away, you know, as part of that process, and John's mentioned that traffic control plan, which is kind of a generic term, that does involve where, you know, trucking routes are, where the city prefers to have the routes, and then also through consultation, as the councillor has mentioned, you know, with the community to see if those are acceptable, if they'd like to change it to different routes. So, you know, in my past experience, we've had ones where we assume it's going to be on the more major roads, and the community's actually said, no, that's actually like, you know, a park or a school. Can we shift it to an adjacent roadway? That would be better access. We've done that. So those type of things get worked out in consultation, you know, in a few steps, but it is a little bit flexible on where it'll end up.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And we've marked a couple more questions that have seemingly perhaps maybe not been touched on quite yet. So someone asks, and I'll direct this to John maybe, and if Foten and your team would like to take it after. Does the city take existing approved intensification projects into account when examining traffic studies, for example? There are numerous towers under construction or approved along Scott, intensification on Lanark, etc. And I'll put that to you, John, maybe.
Oh yes, I believe we do. Unfortunately, I don't have my transportation project manager with me, but perhaps if Andrew Hart could answer that question from the applicant team.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it, and it's also, you know, you can apply this to the other, you know, disciplines and studies that have been done. They're all kind of a cumulative impact. You know, for example, the TIA identified 9 different developments in the area that could influence our study area intersections. This was one of the check-ins we have with city staff to make sure we've captured all these. Sometimes more get added later on in the process or after consultation. And in general, the way these studies work in the city is first in, you know, first out. So the next study that comes in after our study gets initiated would include our development in their study. So each one is supposed to build on the you know, the existing ones in the queue with the city and go from there. So it is actually constantly building as you assess these developments, you know, through time.
Thanks, John and Andrew, for the clarification. It's much appreciated. I think, you know, sometimes it's easy to assume how those things work, but you might not even know in the end.
Steph, if I may, I think one of the chats that I would love to have with the tenants offline, because it literally is a several-hour chat, is about how the city's official plan works with the master planning processes to take a look at the infrastructure that's required for growth. We know that this is an area that in our official plan has been deemed one to be where we want to put tall towers. We know that there are going to be tall towers in the city, and the province's provincial policy statement and the city's official plan say that, you know, those tall towers should be in places like this that are, you know, very immediately adjacent to our highest order transit, in areas that are rich in amenities. But it does imply that there's going to be infrastructure that needs to be built, and that's where the the master planning processes come in with respect to parks and green space. I know there was a question about green space elsewhere in the queue. Sewers, traffic, roads, all of those master plans have to be done to account for the fact that, you know, our official plan has said, okay, we're going to significantly intensify the areas near transit. And if that's going to be supportable and sustainable, we go through the master planning process to say, here are the infrastructure investments that need to be made in order to support that growth. I find it an absolutely fascinating discussion. And if residents want to have that with me at some point, I would be very happy to run through how the provincial policy statement flows through the official plan, flows through the master plans, which flows through the zoning. But it's an extraordinarily long discussion to try to have tonight. Thanks, Steph.
No problem, Jeff. Thanks. And I'll jump to two perhaps site plan questions, but nonetheless raise them now. So first question is, would the applicants consider installing L3 EV charging instead of L2 chargers? And they note that the difference in speed would make shared charging easier to coordinate. And they say my car on L2 takes 10 hours for 60% charge, as opposed to well under an hour on L3.
That's a great question. It's definitely something at site plan that we could definitely look into about what type of EV charging stations could be incorporated into the project.
And maybe to build on that, Patricia, as a site plan matter, to the person who commented it, it would be great to put that in comments to someone like John, to be considered for site plan, just to make sure it's, you know, I reiterated it, and this could apply to most any question tonight. Get it in writing so that it's in his hands and eventually in your hands.
Yeah, definitely. And as John had said, we're expecting to get our first round of comments, I think shortly, very beginning of the new year. But there isn't really a limit on when people can submit their comments to him. I know he'll accept comments right up until he writes his staff report. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Patricia. And another site plan question, but nonetheless, maybe you'll know the answer now. Will the new building have full green bin handling for garbage? Is that planned?
Yes, I think all of the buildings now have green bin. I think that was council directive. Jeff, I'm not sure, wasn't that council directive for green bins in apartment buildings now?
I thought we were looking at how to mandate that, so it's coming.
Okay.
And
But
certainly,
we're doing it in our buildings. So,
yeah, I think any architect who isn't putting in place the infrastructure in order to handle organics in any of the new multi-residential is behind the times. I'm sure you are planning for it, and it will soon be part of our infrastructure, or sorry, our waste management master plan.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff and Rod. Sort of picking some of the last of the 20 questions we've got right now, trying to find what we haven't seen already, but there's been a few questions on, I believe it was green space. So I'm going to go and pull that out just now. So if this is approved, and with increasing density in the area, what steps will be taken by the city to make sure there's enough green space left in the area? This might be a John and perhaps a Jeff question, but to put it out there nonetheless, I certainly see the concern.
Right. So yeah, we would certainly be collecting fees for parkland dedication, and the monies would go to you know, purchasing new lands as well as upgrading existing facilities in the area. But I guess at the site plan level, at a site sort of design exercise, we would also be looking at sort of creating spaces on site that the users of the site can enjoy as well. And then potentially even have open that up to the public in the form of privately owned public space. But again, that's something we look at site plan typically.
Yeah, one of the benefits of this particular plan is we actually are probably adding more green than exists today because we're building over top of a very large surface parking lot. So we do have that advantage, and so we're going to be able to green the substantially. I think create a more interesting green corridor through in between the two buildings that link all the way down to Scott Street. So I think there's opportunities to do better green than what's there now, and more probably. I've done the calculation, but I think maybe even more green than what's there now. So
I think one of the question may also just be motivated, like we are. My guess is that from the base of Nannygoat Hill through Churchill along the Albert Scott corridor, we're probably over the next 20-30 years going to be adding 20,000 new residents in new multi-residential all along the spine of the spine of the Confederation line. And I suspect the resident who's posed this question is probably wondering, how are we going to make sure that we have the parks where people can play soccer? Where are the play structures going to go? The various different types of parks that we have, and frankly, that's a question with which council is also grappling. To John's point, we'll collect cash in lieu of parkland fees from this development, and then those will go into a parks improvement and parks acquisition fund. And that's actually, in the past couple of months, I've directed that some of our funds be used to purchase a property in Wellington Village that is unserved by a proper park. So we're buying a residential lot there. And I've got another acquisition that I'm hoping to hear more about in terms of being successful. The problem is that they're extraordinarily expensive. So for those of you, sorry, you all live in the area, you know that a residential lot in Kitchissippi Ward is selling for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and trying to get those numbers together, trying to put the assemblies together in order to build new parks is going to be challenging. And sometime during this term of council, we will be doing an urban parkland acquisition strategy that will speak to how we fund it, because cash in lieu of parkland is not going to do it itself. And we also have a parkland first policy now, such that on large developments like this one, we try to take parkland rather than cash. So the cash doesn't build up as quickly. There are some interesting opportunities, for example, at Lanark. When the feds eventually go to do 250 Lanark, we will, certainly get a fairly large green space out of that development, which I anticipate we'd want to turn into at least partially a fenced-in dog park, which has been a challenge for us in this neighborhood for years. Tiny's Pasture will have a big new park. So some of those big new public developments are also coming with fairly significant large parks for the ward. And then of course it's interesting because if you take a look at the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, you'll see the target amount of parkland that we want each resident to be able to enjoy. And that actually doesn't take into account the NCC land. And so we kind of pretend that, that fairly massive NCC space that is adjacent to this particular development doesn't exist from the perspectives of meeting the targets for hectares of parkland per 1,000 residents. So it is a discussion. I am confident that, over the years, we will be able to provide the parkland. The NCC's contribution is obviously huge in this particular neighborhood. And I am pleased to see in this particular development, and I know my colleagues are going to be pleased to see it as well, the replacement of a surface parking lot that contributes nothing to green space with, I agree with you, Rod, there is probably a net new addition of park space on this particular property. There's no conveyance on this one though, for parkland? You're not
No.
conveying any of this land to the city?
It'll be cash in lieu.
It'll be cash in lieu. Okay. So 60% of that cash in lieu will go into a ward parks fund. And I've been pivoting the use of that fund to actually acquire more green space. It's expensive and slow, but we're starting to actually purchase properties to turn them into parks in some of our neighborhoods. So that's been kind of exciting for me. Thanks, Steph.
No problem. Thanks, Jeff. So I know we're down to our last 6 minutes, probably the last 10 minutes if we go a bit, over. We still have quite a number of questions, so I'm going to try and choose the last sort of few, and hopefully it speaks to at least the breadth of everything we've been touching on tonight. So we have a few questions on this point. Lanark in Clearview area is a school bus route and right across from a playground. How do plans mitigate the safety risk to our children, I suppose in the actual development plan, but also, I know it's been touched on, but in the construction plans as well?
I'll let Andrew answer that one.
Just throw me under the proverbial bus, eh? So in the as this zoning site plan concept, there's no changes to Lanark, so there's nothing to mitigate there in the full conditions. I have seen in some of the other comments there's probably a discussion to have on Clearview, but that I expect that to come out through some city comments as well. During construction, hoarding would be put up around the site to prevent people from walking in and out, and that would have to remain outside of the city's right of way. And any encroachment onto city property, so the sidewalks, the roadways, would all be part of that pre-construction meeting and management plan to make sure any of these risks are addressed and mitigated. In one situation, we had a site right beside a MUP, and it was right up against the multi-use pathway. Sorry, I don't want to use an acronym, a multi-use pathway. We ended up having a covered corridor over that pathway to protect in case there was anything from that site that might come across the hoarding as they're constructing up above. So those are the type of things that you can look at once you get to the construction stage and start looking at what those impacts are, how close you're going to be to those sidewalks or the public realm.
Thanks, Andrew. And I think there was a similar follow-up question that was just at that part of the process, communicating with the nearby school and ensuring they're looped in and part of those discussions too. And jumping to another question, given the new paved entrance roads and paths, is the footprint of the new building smaller than the existing parking lot? And that is the only way you would achieve more green space.
Yes, I believe the footprint of the proposed building, the width is about 20 meters, and I think the existing, I'm trying to look, I don't have the survey in front of me, but I think the parking lot is a double, or let me just see if I can see it from, there's one photograph here. Double roll of cars, so I think it's 36 meters right now, so we're a fair bit narrower and the same length essentially.
Got it. Thank you so much, Rod. And pulling some of probably what will be either the last or the second to last question. So Clearview is already in poor condition. One would assume that construction of 210 would only accelerate deterioration. Who carries the responsibility of the care of the road? And how would the city factor this issue into their decision on or into their road modernization plans? John, maybe that's best for you, but I'll leave it open to everybody.
I'm not sure how it, how our units decide what roads need to be improved at what time. But certainly if there's an identified, if the frontage along the subject property needs to be improved and sidewalks reinstated to our current standards, then that's something we would look at through the site plan application process. And
For
it's
the road,
something that, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, for the road itself, I expect you're right. There'll be a fair number of concrete trucks, et cetera, and that'll accelerate the degradation of the road over and above what we might expect otherwise. There is an asset management plan for our streets and other assets as to when they need to be rebuilt. And one of the things that my office does is when we have reason to believe that a street may be in the wrong place in the queue for either resurfacings or repairs, we work with city staff to try to make sure that it gets into the right place. And we've had a few streets in the ward that we've been able to accelerate the maintenance on, especially with resurfacings, before their scheduled time, just by paying attention to the condition that they're in. I'm just wondering, and maybe a long-term resident can email me if they know the answer. There was also a question about, will Clearview finally get sidewalks? Sidewalks generally only go in when the street gets rebuilt. And I'm just wondering if anyone knows when the street was last rebuilt. So not just resurfaced, but if anyone knows when it was dug up completely with new pipes going in, because that's an opportunity to do a lot of things with the street when it needs to get rebuilt. And many of the streets, I think you're seeing, for example, Ferndale is being rebuilt next year. Many of the streets in this neighborhood are coming due for street rebuilds, and those rebuilds are an opportunity to do a lot of good upgrades and with new infrastructure for cycling and pedestrians.
Awesome, thanks, Jeff. So I see we're at time. So I think we'll begin to wrap things up. I tried to grab most of the questions. I think that was not entirely, successful. So I do apologize to everybody who might have not had their question answered. So I'll begin a bit of a slow wrap up, and Jeff, if you want to give closing comments after I give some of the information on where to get everyone's comments next. So John Bernier is the planner on this file, and you'll probably note that there's a deadline to get comments in on this rezoning and also on the site plan control application. John, maybe you can reassure us here, but is that a hard deadline for comments for you, or are you continuously sort of taking them, obviously within a certain timeline, but to reassure maybe some people, especially the holiday season?
Yeah, so obviously the sooner that you send me your comments, the better. And then we could actually, negotiate with the applicant team and try to resolve some of these issues at the outset. But, and as we move through the process and start resolving these issues, it becomes a little bit more difficult to make some of these big changes. But yeah, to your point, I'm pretty much accepting comments all the way up to the point of when I'm drafting my planning report for planning committee. So, if you think of something later on in the process, or as we get new, as they revise their submission and submit that to us, and you notice other issues, then feel free to continue to send me comments throughout the entire process. And I'll just, again, I'll plug our DevApps page. So Google City of Ottawa DevApps, and then look up 200 Clearview, and all of the submission materials there, as well as an opportunity or a means of contacting me if you'd like. And it actually is one of my preferred methods, is just to send me an email. It's John, JOHN .Bernier, BERNIER at ottawa.ca, and I'll put that in the chat. Oh, thanks, Steph. There it is.
No problem at all. Thanks for that, John. And I think I'll just note too, we said 210 Clearview to find on the dev apps. I think on our own blog post, 200 Clearview is what you're going to want to look up on dev apps to find the whole package with the supporting documents and have that for your review. So with that, that's sort of how you're going to get your comments into John for consideration. Those comments get packaged up and sent to the applicants, sort of for their consideration as this application goes forward. This is being recorded. I'm probably going to put it up by end of day tomorrow. So if anyone would like to review it, anyone would like to forward it to neighbors to review, that's going to be the perfect way to do that on the Kitchissippi Ward YouTube. I'm going to plug that in the chat and then toss it to Jeff just in case he wants to close with anything.
No, I would invite people to reach out for the larger questions around the city planning process and what powers the city has and doesn't have. I think it's important to note, and John touched on it in his discussion. There are, and sorry, I don't want to go down the 2-hour path. I start with Magna Carta and it goes for 2 hours. There are 2 levels of government in Canada. We are not one of them. We have the powers that are given to us by the province. The province is ultimately in charge of city planning, and we can't make decisions that go outside of the powers that we have. And I know a lot of the questions that I've been seeing this evening stem around, can the city take this into consideration? Can it do this? Every decision that City Council makes is appealable to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Many of you probably remember that as the Ontario Municipal Board, if that sounds more familiar. And so we have to stick within the grounds and the considerations that we are supposed to consider when making zoning considerations. And if we start to reject applications on the basis of things that are not legitimate planning grounds, then our decisions get overturned by the tribunal, and predictably so, and at great cost to everybody involved, the taxpayer, the developer, and the future tenants who are going to move into these buildings in the form of higher housing costs. So we stick to our knitting. We stick to the grounds that we've been given by the province for considering whether or not a zoning is appropriate. If you want to touch base with me on that statutory environment, I'd be more than happy to chat with you for like literally hours offline, because I find it all extremely fascinating. I know it's a frustrating discussion for residents, but I do find it's helpful to understand the statutory grounds upon which planning decisions are made in Ontario when trying to understand the best arguments that you can put forward to John to try to convince him to make his recommendation one way or the other. I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Steph.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff. So in that case, thank you everyone, both on the applicant team, for city staff, and of course to everyone nearby and all interested residents for taking the time to join us this evening. We've had one of our full-time sort of discussions, so we really appreciate you taking time to come out tonight. And as Jeff said, please feel free to write our office with any concerns or questions or any other sort of matters you'd like to discuss related to this application. Otherwise, have a wonderful night, and we'll stop it there for now. Thanks, everybody.